Where do I start video? Hey!
Hey, how's I'm gonna be very Midwestern.
Sorry, that's like the Zoom equivalent of being welcomed on stage, where you're just
Yeah,
waiting behind the wings, and I'm just sitting here
exactly.
like
Like you,
waiting to like start video. Like here I come.
it's like you came out from behind the curtains, Johnny Carson style.
Love it.
I'm gonna be Midwestern and ask you how the weather is in Berlin because that's what we people from Kansas do is we talk about the weather.
Well, okay, so I'm from Australia, so it's opposite seasons, and
Oh, right.
right. So, and we're just coming out of summer, and I chat with the family a lot, and they're in the middle of the winter, and there's always that point 2 times a year where the sort of the average sort of daily temperature sort of crosses over, you reach parity almost. So we're about there. So it's sort of between 15 and 20 degrees sort of average as it is back at my sort of parents' farm in Australia. And it's only going to get colder here and warmer there. So it's to me, it feels like sort of that crossover point. It's the end of summer. Here comes winter kind of thing.
I'm going to start us off by asking you 3 extremely hard-hitting questions that are going to allow us to get to know your personality a little bit. Are you ready?
Yes. I'm ready.
First,
would have been great. It would have been great if you'd like put these 3 to me beforehand. But sure, let's do it on the fly.
First hard-hitting question: favorite favorite dried fruit, apricot or fig?
I don't think fruit should be dried. I think it's fine as it is.
Ooh, an outside the box answer.
Yeah, that's what I'm going with there.
Okay, reasonable. Would you rather drown or freeze to death?
Jesus Christ. I think freezing to death's nicer, isn't it? One of them's nice.
I think that's what everybody says.
Yeah, I could see myself doing a Captain Oates and just sort of like rolling out of the tent for a walk and never coming back.
Okay.
I'll go freezing. Yeah.
And preferred other Charles Hutton, the watchmaker or the British
geologist?
Geologist.
I'll go the geologist.
Okay. He apparently calculated the Earth's density at some point.
Yeah, he's up there. I mean, everything I've done, I've sort of gone down as Chaz Hutton, and so which was a much less populated sort of Google search area, I guess.
Right.
It wasn't too hard to sort of get in there. I'll leave the Charles Hutton Google section to those guys.
Speaking of that, I actually had never noticed the actual formulation of your Twitter handle because I don't think we pay attention to those things. I'm just like Insta Chaz, whatever. Which, by the way, if you're listening, you need to check out. It's Insta and then CHAAZ. Was AZ taken?
Yeah. That's literally all it is.
Yeah.
But also I'm sorry, go on.
No, that's it. Tell me.
Well, just in terms of that name, I didn't have that Instagram for a long time, and I was drawing these comics for friends, just on the fly and putting them into sort of WhatsApp groups and stuff like that. And a lot of them were trying to convince me to put them into an Instagram. And the sort of joke name for the Instagram that they envisaged would eventually happen was just InstaChaz. And so when I finally sort of gave into them and actually set up an Instagram and put those comics onto Instagram, and it came to like, what name do you want to choose? I ended up just going with InstaChaz. So InstaChaz has always been sort of a placeholder for a much better name, and then eventually became the name. So yeah, that's how that happened.
So speaking of how things happen, we'll talk a little bit about your backstory in a second, but I kind of want to know, what was the inflection point from I'm just doing this for fun and posting these on Instagram to I have a whole bunch of followers now?
So I'd moved to London from Melbourne. I was working in architecture, and I had a thought where just one of those moments where I wasn't really going anywhere with architecture in Melbourne, and this London, But then when people ask me how's work, instead of saying, yeah, good, then I'll be able to say, oh yeah, I work in London now, which feels like sort of an improvement in a weird way. So I did that. And then a few months in, yeah, just started drawing these funny comics, sending them to the friends, as I said. And they eventually convinced me to put them into an Instagram, which started to get attention. Pretty slow at first, but then I think it was around 6,000 followers. And then on the same day, I think BuzzFeed and HuffPost both did sort of stories about it. And then within 2 weeks, it had jumped up to 80,000, at which point there were publishers asking for book deals. And eventually I ended up signing a book deal. And at a certain point, you know, they really wanted this book, like a lot of new material for this book in a short amount of time. And I realized I'd need to sort of quit my job, at least for a small amount of time, to sort of get this book done. And then maybe I'd go back to architecture. And anyway, by the time I'd finished the book and sent it off and had a bit of money in the bank from the book deal, I had this moment of like, well, hang on a second, maybe let's not go back to architecture straight away. Let's you know, maybe I'll, you know, see if this drawing comics thing can work as a career. And I've sort of been desperately trying to make it work as a career ever since. So yeah, that's the trajectory, I think.
I would imagine, and you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that at some point there probably was a shift between I'm doing this just for the hell of it to, oh wow, people are expecting something of me. If that is the case, assuming that's the case on some level, how have you kept it fun for yourself? How do you stay excited about the actual work?
I think the shift is probably when you get paid commission work, where, you know, prior I kind of felt like a need to sort of be updating a certain number of days, right? And you'd do that, and you'd maybe think of 2 or 3 good ones a day, like in one day, and then you'd sort of drip feed them, so you've got some consistency and blah blah blah. And then once, you know, things progressed a bit, and there'd be some branding company or blah blah blah, whatever, you know, oh, we've got this company, they need some funny comics about this or that, we're going to pay you. You're like, oh, fantastic, great, let's do it. And then suddenly you're sitting down with a blank piece of paper and a deadline, and saying to yourself, okay, be funny. Like, that's now be funny. Go now, before 5, go. That's when it's okay. It's one of those things. It's sort of like a career-wise, it's a really privileged kind of position, because you can go, that's when it feels like work. But it's like you're drawing stick figures for a job. All right. So it's like I can never complain about, you know, it's like, oh no, I've got to draw some stick figures and make them funny by 5 o'clock today. You know, there's much harder jobs out there. So I never really complain about it, but in terms of just like a fun kind of side thing that seems to, you know, make people laugh, that point where it does become a bit more of a job, I guess, is that kind of situation.
You know, you mentioned humor, which I always find to be a fascinating topic, because it's much more complex. I think it's both simpler and more complicated than we realize. In my first writings, got a reputation also for being funny, and similarly started to put pressure on myself to like, well, I gotta be funny now.
Sure.
And remember going through that, especially when I would give talks. Like at first, when I would give talks, it was just sort of, you know, oh, this is just a thing I do. It's not important. And so I was loose and reasonably funny. And then when I started to think, oh, I need to like insert jokes in here, it was a disaster. What have you learned about the act of being funny by now doing it for quite a while?
I think the thing that led me into this was just a natural, sounds really egotistical. It's like a natural ability to be funny. But like, you know, like I knew I was probably not suited to architecture when I spent most of my time writing group emails about Friday lunch and like spending like an hour getting as many jokes into that as I could. I'm like, I've really nailed this email. And realizing that I wasn't actually doing that much decent architecture. So like that kind of led me into this, but then the more I've worked in it and the more I've done it and stuff, that well runs dry to a certain degree. And so you have to start developing sort of ways to get to a joke or work a thing out, especially with sort of commissioned work where someone wants you to make a joke about a certain thing. Often it's about an example. It sounds very abstract when you talk about it conceptually like this, but for the most part, something will happen to me in my life and I'm like, oh, that's a thing. That's kind of funny. And say, okay, case in point, you know, people have really small bladders, you know, constantly need to use a toilet or something. And there's always that thing where you're out and about and they're like, I need a toilet. We need to go to this bar now. You're like, okay. I'm like, okay, that's a thing. You know, they're not the only person in the world like that. This must resonate with other people. So you've got your joke, you've got the subject of your joke, I guess, there, right? People with small bladders, you know, and the struggle of going out, you know, and then it's like, and then you need sort of a framework to hang that that concept off, or a visual framework in my case with drawing comics. So in my case, when I drew that comic, I drew your sort of classic John Beck, who was it, Beck or whatever, the tube map, all right, with the lines and the circles for the stations and blah blah blah. And then at each station, the station was like, you know, your toilet at your house, the pub toilet, the cafe toilet near your house, the work toilet, the gym toilet, like, and you know, and it's like, this is how people with small bladders see a city plan and stuff. So you've got like, it's a case of taking that idea of something that could be funny if you frame it right, and then finding the framework to hang it on or to visually represent it with.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I've ended up sort of spending whole days just drawing visual frameworks with no joke. So like drawing a house of cards or a dartboard or a IKEA instruction manual. And all those things are really familiar visual frameworks that you can then insert a joke into. You know, multiple different jokes depending on what you can come up with. So, yeah.
Did you find that it was so? You know, I think one of the cool things about Instagram is the way that it supports stuff like what you're doing. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that some people may know my brother does charts on Instagram and has turned that into a thing, right?
Of course, yes. And Matt, right?
Yeah. And so
we've chatted a bit on Instagram.
Yeah.
Like, I got to say one thing about this, right? Because it's that question. Because I think he got started like maybe a little bit after me, right? And he started on whiteboards, right?
Yep.
And there was always that thing where like people would be, I think, commenting on his stuff, saying like, "Oh, you're just ripping off Chaz," like not that often, right? Or just like, you know, this kind of thing. And it was like, I'm sure we've definitely chatted, you know, on messages and stuff, but it was that sort of thing where you're like, no, this is great. Like, I didn't invent charts. I didn't invent stick figures. Right. It's so great to see other people doing these things. And his stuff is so great. And he's sort of, and, you know, he started on whiteboards and now he's shifted his style as well. And I've shifted my style. And it's so great seeing, there's quite a lot of, I think, people on Instagram like doing all these kind of things. It's so great sort of watching people's styles change and differ and then, you know, posting their stuff and like, check this person out. And that's such a great, wonderful thing. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's been cool to also see that like he's figured out certain things about where the punchline needs to be visually within a chart. And so one thing that he's been, I think, thinking a lot about is how do you translate that to a book, because he's working on a book also. Did you notice that it was different in thinking about how do I make the joke in this very small square versus when I have this big space? did that change? Because I just think it's interesting to think visually about how that might have shifted.
When I did a book?
Yeah.
Not really. Sorry,
Okay.
sorry for not a very interesting answer, but essentially the book that I did, each one of the comics, and back then I was still drawing stuff on Post-it notes.
Mm-hmm.
Each comic was just on a Post-it note, which I had thankfully was living with a fantastic photographer who set up a whole rig, and we photographed each single one.
Mm-hmm.
And so each page of the book had a single comic on it, and then I was able to sort of riff with the caption underneath. So that the transition, the style of that book, page per page, great toilet read.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The style of that book being just like one page is one joke, there's no narrative, blah, 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 is actually not that far removed from an Instagram account,
Right.
if you know what I mean. So that was a very easy transition, I think.
Do you, I'm trying to think about how I want to say this. When you're in the flow of working, right? So like when you're feeling good about things, do you recognize that is happening?
Yeah, and then I go and have a break. It's too much.
Like, well, this feels great.
I'm like, I'm doing great. I'm like, maybe I should have a coffee. Should I go to the shops? Have I been to the shops lately? Do I need to go to the shops? Does anyone want to have lunch? What time is it? Maybe I should go. Do I need a nap? I don't know. Yeah.
Because I think it is interesting thinking about like when we all hit that state of flow, and whether we recognize that it has happened, or if it always happens that we recognize it after the fact. I guess what I'm driving at is, do you look forward to that? Can you count on it? Is it something that you rely on to keep you going?
For me, I think it's hard for me to get into a flow, because I feel like, generally speaking, a flow needs a flow kind of indicates some kind of time period, right? Whereas like the time period it takes me to draw a comic, like, you know, the best flow I can get into at any given point is like 45 minutes, an hour. And then I finish that comic, and then I'm like, ooh, what next, kind of thing. I have a coffee and blah, blah, blah. For me, flow, it's not like recognizing I'm in a flow, but sort of identifying when I'm most likely to do the best work, and zeroing in on that kind of situation. So for me, and look, this varies from people to people, and I'm about to say I prefer working in the mornings, and anyone listening is going to be like, hell no, right? It's like, you do you, find your own thing, like whatever time of day. But for me, I've worked out getting up really early in the morning. It's like getting down and sitting at the desk at like 6 a.m. Trust me, I don't get it right all the time, you know, sleeping off. But if I get at the desk at 6 a.m. and just like work, you know, 2 hours, you know, we'll have a coffee, work, and then have some breakfast at like 8, have a shower, get dressed, come back, and almost start an actual day. And then by 2 in the afternoon, I'm pretty cooked. Like, I'm done. You know, and I'm okay walking away from the desk and sort of taking the rest of the day off, because I've got that solid sort of 6 or 7 hours in.
Do you split the day into, I'm assuming there's like, this is the creative time, and then there's, you know, I got to answer the emails and all the other stuff.
I mean, I live in Berlin, so that's, you know, it's separating professional email time from sort of creative times, you know, a grey area. But no, I like to put off replying to emails for no good reason. I'm not, you know, like, or the really easy 15-minute job that you should do.
Right.
You know, like, I should just do it straight away, but for some reason I'll leave it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then just in a fit of, you know, oh my God, what am I doing, one morning I'll sort of go and do it. So yeah, I'm not perfect on that one, but generally I think with what I do and with drawing comics and this kind of thing, like, it's not like you're working in an ad agency or an architecture firm or, God forbid, a law firm, or where you've just got like this constant stream of emails. You know, I'd love to be able to say I'm a really busy man, but like the number of emails I get because my jobs are sort of, you know, relatively sort of one by one and, you know, pretty chill. I don't actually have such a huge amount of emails that I need to sort of put aside time for them.
Mm-hmm. I would, again, I'm making assumptions, but it seems that it would be difficult to reverse engineer your career and say, I'm going to do exactly what he did, and then that's going to lead me to the spot that he's in, right?
Yeah.
But I do wonder if you were to advise someone who wanted to be kind of in your shoes, right? Just that there's a certain amount of creative success that you've had. You're able to, you know, get paid to do this thing. As you look back, are there a couple of things that you did right that you would say, hey, this was a good idea. This was a thing that I did that helped?
I think that question in of itself sort of presumes, um, like it presumes there's sort of like a sort of a career maze, and there's one way to sort of get through it. And if you want to end up what I'm doing, you have to do this and then this and then this and then this, right? Which I think is the wrong way to look at it. I think, and you know, I'll end up giving this advice to sort of, I'll give this advice to anyone. It's one of those things where, and especially anyone young who doesn't really know what they kind of think they want to do this thing, but they're not sure about it. And, you know, and my thought's always been like, inertia is death, right? So it's like, if you just don't make a decision and don't move and wait for something to happen, you know, no hope. But if you sort of go, look, just pick something and go with it, and say it's a 3-year course or it's a whatever it is, right? And you get sort of halfway through it and you realize it's not for you, but during that time you've seen something shiny out of the corner of your eye and you kind of go off and do that thing. And then you're doing a completely different thing. Somewhere down the track, there's going to be like an employer who's like, we need someone who's got experience in this field and this field, and 2 completely different fields. And that person's going to be like, oh my God, I was doing that. And then I just went sideways and did that. And like suddenly they're in the perfect place to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like with my trajectory of that, you know, I've studied architecture. I didn't technically finish. I still need to hand in the paperwork essentially, but and then I was sort of working as a student in architecture firms, and then I ended up doing comics. But the whole time I was working in architecture firms, I spent a lot of time listening to comedy podcasts. I spent a lot of time writing, you know, funny emails that I probably shouldn't have been wasting time doing. I'd before Chaz, there were at least 2 or 3 other sort of internet projects that I tried that didn't go anywhere. So I guess in terms of that, you know, what's the ideal path? You need to realize, if you look at my path, there's a lot of sort of branches going up to a dead end, and I'm going, okay, and then going back, and then another dead end here, and going back, and then come up. And then when I finally sort of end up doing what I'm doing now, it's those little dead ends and what I've sort of learned during the dead ends that have sort of helped to, I guess, sort of get me to where I am now in a weird way, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah. One thing that I see at Writer's Block and talk to people about a lot is the confidence that it takes to go out and try one of those new things. And I wonder if you have you had pitfalls where you thought like, oh geez, I'm just not good enough at this, and so I shouldn't try this? And have there been times when you've been able to say, no, I do believe that this will work, and so therefore I'm going to go out and try it? Because I think we all go through this. There's like this reservoir of confidence that we have based on sometimes like outside evaluations or just, I don't know, inner gumption, whatever it might be. And sometimes it's difficult to say, I'm going to go try this thing, because we just at the time don't have that confidence. What have you fallen back on in those times?
I'm wary of like, I keep subverting a lot of your questions, and maybe it's just sort of a, like, maybe it's a UK Australian v American kind of a different sort of way of kind of seeing things. I don't know. But in terms of that sort of, I, especially with that, the trajectory that I've gone through sort of, you know, lowly architect to drawing comics to suddenly comics becoming the thing and blah, 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 right? It does sound like one day I just decided to draw some comics and that became a thing, which is couldn't be further from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about, you know, the confidence to, you know, go, I'm going to do this thing, right? That confidence, I think, always comes back down to financial ability. If you've got some parents who are willing to give you some money, you know, you're going to have a lot more confidence, like going it alone, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. Whereas if you're, you know, you're going through art school or something, you're working in a bar on the weekends, you're just trying to pass university and like make enough money, and you know, and then someone's like, why don't you do your own thing? You're like, I don't have time for that, or the money for that, or the capital for that. So, and in the same regard, when I was doing these comics and stuff, I never quit my architecture job and went, I'm going to do comics. I was drawing comics on the side, and I only quit that architecture job when I got the first installment of that book deal. So I was never financially, I never took a financial risk, so to speak, in terms of like following a dream or whatever, just going to screw architecture, I'm going to draw comics. Like, I left because it made financial sense, not because I made some late, which is such a boring thing for magazines to write about. You know, they want the person who went, screw it, I'm going to do this thing, you know. And so I think that's the key. It's like this weird sort of, you have a side hustle, you know, you're doing your thing and this, and then, you know, you have a few hours free on the weekend, or, you know, before the comics thing, in my spare time, I used to build furniture with a friend of mine in Melbourne. And we were both not qualified to build furniture. He was a mechanical engineer, so was way too overqualified to build furniture. And I was an architect, so I was way underqualified to design furniture, but that didn't stop us. And so I'd finish work and then I'd go to his shed and we'd start making things and prototypes and building stuff. And, you know, that was a sort of side project for a while. It was great. It ultimately didn't go anywhere because I moved overseas, but it could have if I didn't. But it was this thing where our generation can't afford to just drop everything and just like pursue some passion. You have to sort of do it on the side, like you're on a bigger boat and you sort of strip the boat of all its worth and build a little raft on the side of that boat. And one day your little raft floats and you sort of like kick off from the side. And I was doing a kick motion with my foot there. You can't see it on the screen, but yeah, you kick off from the side. You're like, oh, look at my flimsy little raft that's, you know, floating. And then people look at your flimsy little raft and go, wow, how'd you make the big jump? You know?
Well, I think that probably that's the truth always. It's just that we want the mythology, right? It's more fun to hear. And here's if you'll allow me to pontificate. Here's I think
Please
why.
do. I've talked a lot.
I think people.
I'm having another beer.
Great. I think
it's Friday. What is it? Thursday night.
I think people like the mythology of that person just struck out on their own without any sort of backup plan.
Sure.
Because it actually, in some ways, absolves them of the responsibility of trying the side hustle. Because I think the reality is it's always all of this stuff. Like David Bowie could only be as weird as he could afford to be weird, right? Like at a certain point, you have to eat. That's just how it is. But I think we like the mythology of
David Bowie was doing that much eating in the 70s, to be honest.
Or David Bowie can only be as weird as his cocaine habit will support his weirdness, or whatever the thing is, right? Like you have to, at some level, have enough financially to support yourself. And I think it reminds me of the basketball days, right? Like what people wanted to think about me as a basketball player was, oh, he's just naturally gifted, and that's why he's able to do that at that high level. I am not naturally gifted, so therefore I can take the responsibility off myself that I could have gotten there. When in reality, it's work and work and work and work for everybody.
Did you find that a bit insulting though, when people go, "Oh, he's naturally gifted," and you're like,
"Of course,
I've been training quite a lot, guys."
Yeah, of course.
This doesn't come easy, you know.
Yeah, and
I think my parents had to drive me to fucking basketball practice for near on 15 years before they, you know.
Right. Yeah, it is. I think it is a little bit insulting, but I think it is part of the excuses that we all make for ourselves, because we want to think like, well, Charles is just naturally good at drawing and being funny, and we don't want to know about how like it took hours and hours and years of just messing about before it became a thing that people paid attention to. Because we're all kind of lazy, right?
Yeah, of course, but also it's I think it does come down to sort of right place, right time, and this kind of stuff. You only need to look at Twitter when there's even like, you know, the debates recently, and they were on late at night. The vice presidential debate was on late last night, so I woke up and I'd missed the end of it by like 3 hours, and you know, we'd like all the jokes are gone, right? It's like, you know, but what that sort of the point of that anecdote of sorts is that like everyone's quite funny, you know. It's not, the jokes are there, it's an obvious, it's A plus B equals punchline, you know, the jokes are there, and it's just a case of, you know, where you're at, what you're doing. And I thought about this the other day with my Instagram and what I draw on Instagram and the quality of my drawings, which compared to some of the stuff people put out there now are not that great. If I'd started that Instagram now, I'd just be lost in the noise. You know, I think because I started sort of 4 years ago, 5 now, I think, you know, there wasn't as many people drawing, you know, stuff. And so I had less competition to sort of get heard above that noise. But now if you want to get noticed, you really need to sort of pull your weight a bit more.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value in either having perseverance and or adding in the ability to try a whole bunch of different stuff. I would say the same, like you were saying about Twitter. Like, I don't know the value of even starting a Twitter account right now, unless you're just like looking to make yourself insane.
I don't want to sort of, you know, diminish my respect for the Instagram followers, but I find if Instagram followers are sort of the, you know, just people who sort of consume culture and you're like, yes, we love this, it's great, blah, blah, blah. I put the same comics on Twitter and I feel like that crowd's a bit more like, but what does this mean? You know, it's like, it's they're a lot harsher and they're a lot meaner and they're a lot, you know, and they can talk back a lot easier than, you know, just, you know, the way the platform works. So often if I've got a comic that I don't like, it's either shit or it's brilliant. I don't know. And it's like, there's no in between. And I can't work it out. That, like, when you're too close to the work, you're like, is this something good or is this trash? I'll put it onto Twitter and you find out really quickly which one it is. And then depending if it's good or not, I'll put it onto Instagram. So Twitter for me is kind of almost like a weird sort of testing ground for a lot of work. And because of, the way it's set up, you get really lovely feedback and interactions with people. It's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just the value there in saying, I'm going to try, and I don't just mean like, I'm going to try both, like I'm going to use Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for whatever pursuit people are pursuing. It's more that being willing to make furniture for a while. And like, that could have been the thing, right? Like, who knows? And
Well,
also,
I made some very ugly furniture and some nice furniture as well, I might add.
but if the zeitgeist hits at the right moment and it's like suddenly ugly furniture is like the thing everybody needs, then who knows?
Well, we're getting back into the Memphis school now, so bring that on. I love that stuff. It's great.
Let's get into some audience questions.
Oh, cool. How's this work? What do we do?
I'm just going to ask these questions of you. You don't have to do anything.
Okay.
So Sophie wonders, she's impressed about the speed with which you create the one-word topic cartoons. And that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's when people will just, that's usually in stories. People will like send you something and then so she asks, what helps you get into the zone when you're creating them?
Okay. In a funny way, I often do that when I'm not in the zone. That's sort of every time I do that, it's sort of a thing where I'm sort of drawing a blank on everything and I need some prompts or I need some kind of something to go with. And so I'll put it out there and they're like, and the speed at which they come out, sort of, I don't understand it either. And I'm not questioning it. But also it's one of those things like, what you see on the stage as opposed to what you see behind the scenes. When I put the thing out, I'll get sort of 50 suggestions in the first few minutes. And then I'm scrolling through those 50 suggestions and I'll see something that sort of, strikes the bell and I'm like, aha, yeah, I've got that. And I'll draw that. So it doesn't look fast, but I've gone past another 25, 30 options and gone, no.
Mm-hmm.
But I think 2 out of the last 3 comics that I've drawn have sort of come out of that exercise. And they're comics that I would have never come up with just if I was sitting at home by myself staring at a blank piece of paper. So I really sort of value that exercise in terms of sort of getting these prompts. And it's sort of also exciting when you put it out there and people are like, oh, that was mine, or
mm-hmm.
get a chance to sort of put their suggestion in. And I will say there's like, I was scrolling through and there must have been something like easily over sort of 2,000 or 3,000 suggestions, and people are like, oh, you didn't draw mine. I'm like, man, I drew like 3 out of 3,000.
Right.
I've seen stuff on when you're scrolling down. I've seen one. I'm like, oh, that's good, and I've drawn a comic for it, and then I can't actually find it again to press
mm-hmm.
it to actually do the post of it. And it's
mm-hmm.
like, yeah, so there you go.
Do you if you take several days off and then that happens, do you find yourself to be rusty or well rested?
Rusty. Yeah. The more you're drawing, the better you are, I think. It's same with writing. Even if you're writing trash each day for an hour each day, you're still going to write something better on the 7th day than if you'd done nothing the 6 days previous and then tried to write something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because as you were talking about that, I was kind of, it was the vision that came to me was like, it's like you're this very rich field and people are just throwing seeds in it, and the richer the field, like the easier that stuff is to grow. Liz,
it's a bit easier after a coffee.
Liz Berger wonders.
Liz Berger. Great.
She said that she loves your stuff. She also said that she knows you collaborated with Filthy Ratbag. How did that come about?
Filthy Ratbag, Celeste. I love Celeste. So
I have no idea what Filthy Ratbag is. I'll be honest.
Filthy Ratbag. So Celeste Montjoy is like she's an Australian artist, and she has really great stuff. I love her work. Anyway, I'd come across her work a few years prior, and I think I've been following her for a while. And then we ended up messaging each other on Instagram, being like, love your stuff. I'm like, I love your stuff too, blah, blah, blah. And then the next time I was in Australia, we ended up just catching up for a beer. And I think the first, if you can call it a collaboration, it was literally just us scrawling stuff together at the pub. And yeah, been in touch ever since. She was in Berlin a while back. We caught up then. And yeah, I wouldn't call it a collaboration. I'd call it just a drunken scrawl on the back of a napkin, but I guess that counts.
Yeah.
But yeah, her stuff's amazing, and so it's really good. If you don't know it, definitely have a look at it.
Basically, if you're in doubt, go ahead and send the person a message, and then you might end up working together.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if that's the best advice, to be honest. Like, there's a bit of that. Like, it's sort of, I think it's one of those things where it sounds pretentious, but if you've both got a lot of followers and stuff, it's like, it's kind of acceptable and stuff. But then I often get messages from people, just random people, and it's always like, with the best intentions and stuff. But they message you and they're like, oh, basically the questions, a lot of questions you've been asking today, like, how do you do this? How do you get there? How do you blah, 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 blah. To the point where I've ended up writing these things down on online posts, and now I just send them to them rather than be rude and stuff. But I think there is that weird thing where, I don't know, maybe it's an Instagram younger generation thing where you just go, oh, I want to do that. I will just message this person who's like, it's like, I feel like it's like me just like messaging some famous actor and going, how do you get into acting? That looks fun, like.
Right. How would I go about
that aspect of it?
No, yeah. You're just like, Tom Cruise, how do I become you?
Yeah. I mean, of all actors to become, I don't know if that'd be my first choice.
Ernio wonders, what is the next book about?
Ernio, that's a familiar name. Hey, Ernio. The next book, oh my God, it depends what version. I think we're up to version 6 of the next book. It keeps changing every 6 months or so. I don't know. It's one of those things where if you want to do a new book, you need to sort of focus in on something and sort of push it through to a certain amount that you can see something kind of forming, and then be able to put it out there and send it to an agent or publisher or whoever. So at the moment, the next book is a series of half-written pages sort of scattered around the floor, and I'm hoping eventually some of them will congeal into something sort of recognizable as a readable object. Yeah.
We're gonna finish kind of where we started, because someone whose name is not in this list wonders, what's the best and worst thing about living in Berlin?
I'll say the 3 a.m. bedtimes. That is both best and worst.
Both best and worst. Yeah, I can see how that would hamper the ability to get up at 6 a.m. to get to work.
But it's also one of the most wonderful things, like I've had some, I feel like I should do Berlin more justice than that. Berlin's such a wonderful city, and it's sort of to sort of zero down on a best and worst thing. I still like that answer at 3 a.m. But as someone from Australia, where relatively the weather's pretty not as sort of dramatic, or whatever. This Berlin's a completely different city in the summer as it is to the winter. So it's constantly changing. There's some quote that's like, Berlin is never Berlin, or something like that. It's like if you're here longer than 5 minutes, you're experiencing a Berlin that's completely different to the person who arrived 5 minutes earlier. So there's a lot of that going on, and I never came here for the sort of techno or the cool factor or whatever. It sounds weird. I literally came here for the time zone. I thought, with the sort of clients I had at the time and stuff, it made sense to be here, and I was sort of close to London where I had some friends, but have come to really love the pace in a weird way. I remember I'm jumping around here a bit. I'm slowly working my way towards an answer. I will say this. Okay, this is the best thing. I lived in London and then New York for a bit. You know, there's that sort of pace. And I remember arriving here and I found a co-working space to go to. And I got on the train at sort of 8:30 in the morning, Monday morning, to go to my co-working space. And there's literally no one on the train. I'm used to like trying to cram onto the L train or the central line, you know, at 8:30, like waiting for 3 trains to go past so you can get on. And suddenly I get onto the train and there's like 2 kids who've just left Berghain, an old man drinking a beer with his dog, and me. I'm like, where is everyone? And just like realized that there was like the attitude to work here is so chill. It's like you don't live to work, you work to live. You know, like it's sort of that's one of the best things about Berlin. And as I said to you before we got kickstarted, been here 2.5 years. Anytime I've said to some friends, hey, let's go down, you know, for a beer or have some dinner or something, no one has ever sent me a message saying, oh, I can't, I'm stuck at work. No one's ever stuck at work. It's like, it's not that important, you know. So yeah, that's the best thing I like about Berlin.
So we're all moving to Berlin is the answer.
Yeah. Well, and by the time you move here, I'll catch up with you and be like, yeah, man, it's not like it used to be when I moved here.
Right. Well, until then, thank you for taking the time.
It's been wonderful. It's been a lovely chat.
I appreciate it. Everybody, I hope you'll make sure that you're, if not already doing this, follow Chaz Hutton on Instagram, and also pick up his books.
Yeah, I think they're still floating around. They should have got to the bargain basement bin at the front of the bookstore by now. So that's a steal if you see one.
Yeah, that's like the nightmare and the dream is to see your book in the like $3 bin, because you're like, in some ways this is a good sign because it got this far.
No, I've always from the get-go I've been happy knowing that my book is a classic toilet read and it does belong with a bargain basement bin. And I hope one day someone who's never seen it before will go, $1 for this thing, great, I'll take it, and just be, you know, just have a wonderful day discovering it for $1. So, you know, bring it on.
That's the dream. All right, thank you so much.
Been a pleasure.